So once more, this is the Africa E-Mobility Week. Welcome once again. We're just continuing the conversation. We've been speaking around electric mobility for the commercial vehicle sector. And now we're transitioning to pay-go for e-mobility. We have our panelists. We have David. Hi, David, how are you? Alex is here. So as we wait for the other panelists to join in. So Alex, I'll hand it over to you. We have exactly 59 minutes to go. So let's kick off the discussion.
Thank you very much, Warren. Can I quickly confirm that you can hear me and see me?
Yes.
Good. So as welcome everyone, as Warren has alluded to, we have about an hour to unpack a very exciting topic, one of accessibility, especially amongst electric.
Alex, your audio is a little bit faint.
Is this any better?
Yes, you might need to speak a bit louder.
Okay, perfect. So as has been alluded to, we have a panel of which part of the conversation will be quite structured. However, we encourage, or I personally encourage, participation in the form of questions or comments so that we can have a rounded discussion on this topic. Alongside myself on this panel are Vincent, Emile, Julian, and David, who will shortly introduce themselves, and I'm more than happy to start with David. David, if you could please proceed and have a brief intro, and next after that will be Emile.
Great, thanks, Alex. Yeah, my name is David Damberger. I am the Managing Director of MCOPA Mobility, and I've been with MCOPA for over a decade now. And if you don't know MCOPA, we are a asset financing company that helps underbanked customers get access to assets that they usually can't afford. We started off in solar, we've moved into smartphones and digital financial services, and are now very excited to move into electric mobility. Pass it over to Mr. Emile. You can go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for having me today. So my name is Emile Fucheri, and I am co-founder and the CTO of Stima Boda. We are a startup based in Nairobi, developing a technology suite of battery swapping to enable Boda Boda riders to switch to electric motorbikes. Yeah, thank you, and very happy to take part to this conversation.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Emile. And the last two panelists we have are Julian and we have Julian and also, pardon me. As we go ahead, Julian, could we quickly introduce yourself? Sorry, do we have Julian here?
I'm not sure she's made it to the call. Let's go ahead.
Okay. In the absence of Julian, then we can have Vincent. Vincent, please proceed and introduce yourself.
So I'm not sure Julian is in.
We have Vincent also. Do you have Vincent from Untapped?
Yes.
Perfect.
Just on now. Vincent, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me, guys? Cool. Hi everyone. I'm Vincent. I'm the CTO of Untapped Global, which is a financing company. We basically finance productive assets, including e-mobility vehicles, batteries, and so on. And I'm glad to be here to have this chat with you today.
Perfect. So thank you, Vincent, Emil, and David for those brief introductions. David, I'm aware you have a short presentation to share. Is that right? No. Perfect. Failing that, then we will go straight ahead to the discussion. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, I particularly love this because it tackles something very pertinent to both the specific sector and indeed the continent. And this is one of accessibility, and especially accessibility through PAYGO. So my first question, and we can go around the panel, maybe starting with you, David, is firstly, so that we can anchor this discussion properly, I'd like us to define two things. One, precisely what we mean by PAYGO. I would hate to assume that all of us are familiar, and I do this purely for the purposes of clarity. And secondly, what exactly we mean by accessibility, and this can be anchored on your own experiences. So if we could start with you, David, how are you defining PAYGO, and how also are you defining accessibility?
Yeah, great question. So M-KOPA started over a decade ago in Kenya, and although we didn't, I'd say, create the idea of PAYGO, I think we definitely helped popularize it in this part of the world. And what there's many different ways people can define it, but the way we sort of define it is breaking up payments. So usually when people have to pay for assets, they're quite expensive, and so financing is usually around to help people afford that financing. But financing has been around for a long time as well, and often financing is in the form of monthly payments due at the end of the time period, and usually it's over a course of a loan. Sort of the PAYGO that M-KOPA has used in the past is realizing a few things. One is that a lot of our customers can't even afford monthly payments, and the story that comes about is whenever we did our initial market research, you'd ask a customer if they could afford $15 a month, and they'd say no. And you'd say, well, can you afford $3.50 a month? And these are for solar systems. They'd say no. And you'd say, can you do, or $3.50 a week? They'd say no. And if you can do, we ask them, can you do 50 cents a day? And they'd say, yeah, I can afford 50 cents a day. And the realization is that a lot of our customers live in cash flow cycles that are paid daily and earned daily. And this also applies for a lot of the mobility world, where especially electric two-wheelers, where customers are paying daily for fuel and paying daily for most of their expenses, and also earning daily. And so by breaking out payments into micro payments that they can afford, that's one area that makes it much more affordable or accessible to customers, because you're meeting them with where their cash flow cycles are at. The pay-as-you concept that we've used in the past is the second part of that is how our company works. Is we actually lock assets if customers don't pay. And that means is if you don't pay for your solar system, you don't pay for your smartphone, or if you don't pay for your electric motorbike, we can use our Internet of Things technology to remotely lock the asset in a safe way, but that prevents the user from using it. And that is an innovation on the traditional finance model, where a lot of finance companies have loan officers who have to go out and collect back money, and that loan officer model is very expensive and operationally quite intensive. And so by having that technology, that locking technology, you can limit the amount of people you have to go out and visit, and you can actually just stop them using the assets. I think in the mobility space, it's still to be seen what is the right model. Like, we've adapted our model. It's been different for us for solar and for smartphones, and so we're testing out different versions of this now. But at the end of the day, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to take that expensive upfront cost, especially for electric motorbikes or electric vehicles, which are more expensive than petrol vehicles, and be able to break that down into smaller payments that customers can afford. And so that's how we usually defined PAYGO, but it's been used for many companies to define different things. But in our mind, it's just accessible, smaller payments, and some way to get that customer to pay using remote sensing. And then you can know whether you're paying over the course of the other kind of way some companies have defined it is, if you don't need to use it, you don't pay. That's fine, and you pay only when you need to use it. That's some definitions of PAYGO, but others are still more, a traditional loan schedule. But I will stop there and let other participants add their thoughts.
Perfect. Thank you, David. For Emil and Vincent, is this consistent with how both of you and your organizations define PAYGO and accessibility? And if not, what is the variance for your own experience?
Yeah, actually, it's not exactly the way we defined it, but before going there, I would like to add a few things to frame the debate, or the discussion, at least within the realm of electric vehicles. The difference between what we have with normal bodas and normal car is that in Kenya or in countries like Nigeria and stuff, you can find very easily second-hand vehicles, right, which are cheaper, so people can afford it more easily. Electric vehicles are all new, and part of the economics linked to electric vehicles, they are cheap and to use, but they are more expensive to acquire. So concept like pay-go, which basically helps you spread the cost when you actually use it, is very relevant because you don't have a very high upfront cost. So this the general pay-go and the way David described it is the original, the most traditional approach to pay-as-you-go. It's exactly that. Is you basically try to delete as much as possible the cost of entry and get the money to pay as the person uses it all along the life of the product. So the way we are doing it at Untapped, it's based on the same mechanism, but we are not locking things, and we are doing some sort of profit sharing, which means that we only get money if the person who is using the assets, the Boda or the car, is themselves making money. And we collect this profit for a given period of time, let's say 12, 24 months, depending on the financing mechanism that we have put in place. But because we are working with people who need their assets to go and work, for example, taxi driver or Boda driver, the incentive for them to repay is very high. And you don't really need to lock it, because if they, and in addition for us, we also work with operating partner. We don't directly work with the end user, which means that it is our operating partner who are doing the chasing for people when they don't work. But because these intermediaries have incentive in getting more money from us later on, they usually we don't have that many issues with default. So indeed, there are different ways of using the pay-as-you-go system. I'm personally not very convinced that cutting the use when the person doesn't pay is the most efficient, because after a short period of time, the user will get used to new ways of driving, of having light or whatever. And then there is a high risk that they're not going to come back onto the repayment plan. So, and the product is going to be lost for everyone. So, yeah, that's it on my end. Emil.
Yeah, I think we have some good definitions of what pay-go means. Maybe if I can just add an element, is that in Kenya and in East Africa, pay-go is often very related to mobile payments. In Kenya, M-Pesa is really widespread, and even Boda riders now for every ride they are very used to using M-Pesa. So there is also this enabler of mobile payment that facilitates the development of pay-go. There is also the mention of rent-to-own or lease-to-own models. So what we can provide with pay-go schemes is also a possibility for the users to ultimately own the assets, even if he's not able to purchase it cash upfront. He can still, in many cases, he can still access ownership of his asset after a certain period. And pay-go is also very related to productive assets. There is a very good interplay between productive assets and pay-go, because what you do is that you enable someone to get access to a tool, and this tool will generate the money that will be used to repay this same tool. So it's that's why there is a good fit between pay-go schemes and productive assets, because it is by financing the assets that you're unable to generate the revenue that will ultimately repay the asset.
Perfect. Thank you, Emil and Vincent. And I particularly love the angles that are coming through. One on the productive asset side, and also there's a very interesting point that Vincent made on credit management and default rates, which I would love to come back to. But before I go there, maybe starting with you, Emil, I'm always a proponent for complementary skills. So how much of implementing pay-go do you see as your own responsibility within Steamer Boda, and also how much appetite and capacity is there to simply partner with people like M-Copa or indeed Untapped, who would be perfectly placed to manage credit and actually make your product available to people. And yes, maybe I can start with you, Emil, and then hear from David. I know David has quite some experience with working with assemblers and manufacturers. Then back to you, Vincent.
Yes, so indeed, in our business model, PayGo is really the key. We work in a sector of motorbike and motorbike financing that is already existing in Kenya. So in Kenya, we have the specificity that now I think that more than half of the motorbikes are sold through lease-to-own schemes. So we somehow we don't need to wait to transition to electric mobility to already see that these PayGo schemes are really become mainstream. I think today at least 100,000 motorbikes are sold through lease-to-own. You have very large companies now that are specialized in providing loans for fuel motorbikes. You also have companies like Mcopa coming from the asset finance or energy field that are also entering this field of financing motorbikes. So in our approach at Stima, we want to leverage this expertise of companies that know how to finance motorbikes. And then, as a battery swapping company, the real thing that we have to finance also is the battery. In our model, we separate the cost of the motorbike with the cost of the battery, and the battery we finance it in another way by including the repayment of the battery in the price of the swap, which means the rider will never have to pay upfront the battery. He will not have to pay a fixed fee per day or per week to repay the battery, but every time he comes to swap at our station, we include in the price of the swap the repayment of all the batteries on the network. And with this model, it's a very deep pay-go model or pay-as-you-ride model, because it means that the rider will pay for the battery only when he is actually using his motorbike and riding on the road. So, for example, if he stops riding for a week for any given reason, we will not ask him to pay for the battery, but it's when he will actually ride his bike on the road and do his activity that he will pay for the swaps, and that he will pay for the battery. So for us, there are these two combined aspects for PayGo on the motorbike that is already existing with companies that are already financing fuel motorbikes, and the batteries that we see more as an asset investment as a company, and that we repay through the sale of the battery swapping service.
Perfect, thank you, Emil. David, could I please invite you to share what your experience has been, especially on how companies like Stima Boda and others can work alongside you to make these wonderful products accessible to people?
Yeah, we're very excited about partnerships. You've talked to Stima, we talked to many of the mobility companies, and our model is to finance many different providers. Just as Emil said, like the petrol motorbike financing space here is the same, where you have many financing companies financing many different bike providers and vehicle providers, and so we like that model, and we've already started that, and we're really excited about that. But what is different than this, than in our traditional worlds or other products, is that, as Vincent brought up, it is a productive asset, and as Emil brought up, there's charging or swapping, and these are different models. And I think we all have to be very open-minded. We can't just use the models that have worked with other assets and use them here. We have to kind of redefine and innovate and create this space. And we've looked at India and China and Taiwan. Our investors are invested in Gogoro, but the market's different here. We know this. We know Africa is different. There's all sorts of variables associated with this, and so we're going to have to work together in partnerships to come up with how we solve these problems. And we're excited by the swap models that the Stimas and the Ambersands are testing out, and there's a great model there with battery swapping and being able to reduce the upfront cost for the customer and make sure they have a battery. There's other companies doing a charge model where you can charge at home or charge on the go. We're excited about both those models, and we have to see how that innovation happens. And it's going to have to happen through partnerships and leveraging different assets that the companies have. Mcopa in the past, we've been selling batteries, lithium-ion batteries, for a decade now with our solar systems. We have a battery testing team in China. We do assembly, and Copa assembles televisions. We do local assembly, and so we're happy to help out partners and share some of our expertise in those areas because we have experience. But electric vehicle batteries are different than solar batteries, and so we're all learning and adapting about what works in Africa. And I think there's going to be some innovation, and I don't think it's going to be just like Taiwan or just like India or just like China. I think we're going to have to do a made in Africa solution, and that's going to take partnerships of all the companies here.
Perfect. And before we quickly move to Vincent, for the purposes of clarity, David, could I rest on you to help us clarify? You mentioned that you're already working with Steamer Buddha and other organizations. Is this purely piloting what access for those products could look like, or this has been piloted and fully rolled out?
Yeah, we're just piloting right now. So we're in conversations with many of the providers. We've started selling some electric motorbikes of some companies. We're rolling out some of our own charging stations. We're partnering with other companies that are doing swaps and charging. So I think at this stage, we're just doing a lot of piloting because we don't know the answer of what's going to work and what's not. And I think we're all just trying to learn together. And at the end of the day, I think there's competition in the e-mobility space, but it's very small. I think it's like we're going to support each other. We're really competing against the petrol industry, and I think there's going to be, the more we can all support each other, push each other to innovate more and partner to grow the sector, we're all going to benefit a lot more. So we're really excited about that opportunity.
Perfect. Sounds good. Now on to Vincent. What has your experience been like, especially in the realm of working alongside companies like Steamer Buddha in making their products accessible to the market?
Yeah. So one of the things that we are quite eager to explore is it's something that has been mentioned before. It's all the infrastructure which are required for the Buddha, the electric Buddha or electric car to be able to move around, right? Charging station, swapping, battery swapping station and stuff. Right now, I think that it is an area where there will be some innovation. Whether a company can survive based only on offering charging or swapping, like it would be the case in more mature economies, remain to be seen. Right now, it's companies who have the Buddhas or who manage the fleet, which are also offering the swapping or the charging. So there might be a difference of business model here. If we want to move to companies specializing on battery swapping or charging, there is a need for some standardization, and whether this is going to happen or not is going to be very interesting and could open the door to innovative business model. And another point that I want to make on most of the traditional pay-go world or lease to own is based on a fixed amount. It's basically a loan. So you take an object that has a certain value and you repay it for a certain period of time. And if you're late, your repayment is delayed. I would like just to mention some of the specificities of what we are doing at Untapped. Because we are doing a profit sharing, we add a level of risk, but it's also easier and better for the user because they don't commit to repay a certain amount of money. It's a part of their profits that they are sharing with us. So it's a different type of financing. In some cases, it's more risky. In some other cases, it's better and more profitable. So the management of risk when you do profit sharing is different than when you do a normal loan or pay as you go. So.
Thank you, Vincent. And maybe I'll restart with you once again because you mentioned two interesting things. First is on the topic of access and payment. So in your experience, you see little value in preventing access to the asset and tying that to the payment. Maybe you can help us clarify that. And secondly, I'm very keen to understand or dig further into this profit sharing model. I know electric mobility has the clear benefit of reducing operational expenditure. Are you linking profits to this reduction of OPEX, or is there anything that you are doing to try and make these people more productive so that not only are their OPEX reducing, but also their revenues are increasing, and then they become a little bit more profitable?
Yeah, great. Those are two great questions. So for the first one about Paygo and the fact that I don't see little value to locking it. It's I don't have the experience that David or other specialists of pay-as-you-go can have, but I had some experience in the past setting up pay-as-you-go for gas or for alternative system like that. And part of the debate was, is it really good to lock the system, to lock the user out of the system? Because you work with the fear, right? You threaten the person of locking. But once the threat becomes actual, it's not a threat anymore. The system is locked. So the person, once they get used to not using the system anymore, they go back to their former world where they are going around pretty well without that product. So the incentive to pay is not that great. What is the incentive, which is important, is the threat. If you don't pay, we are going to lock you out. So that can work. But what's tricky here is to understand is that when this threat is realized, the incentive to get back on track and start repaying drops or can drop. There is a case to be made for that. To my knowledge, I don't think that there is actually research which have been done comparing two groups, two homogeneous groups with just a different treatment. One is locked and the other one isn't locked, to see what would be the impacts and to see if the impact in terms of cost of having this additional locking mechanism is worth the cost, if the benefits of such a mechanism is good enough. But maybe David has more visibility on that. So now for the second bit of the question of your question, I think the benefit of profit sharing, and we are not, again, just to be clear, we are not dealing directly with the end user, with the entrepreneurs. We are dealing with companies which are going to finance these end users. So our benefits is more for the company because they don't really take a debt, right? It's not a debt that end up on their balance sheet. It's a profit sharing. And what they can have is when they are looking for raising money, they need to show that their market traction is high. So by using money from Untapped, they can deploy assets in the field, show that their market traction is high, and know that their cost is only limited to their revenues. So if they don't have revenues, they are not going to spend that much money. If they have high revenues, then they are going to contribute more to their asset. Obviously, we don't give a blank check and we don't finance thousands of assets without knowing that the business model is going to work. We work in trenches, right? We start with a pilot, and for us also data collection is very important. If we can't get data on the usage and repayment of these assets, we are not going to continue financing, because we need to have that visibility for the entire model to work. So the benefits is more on the companies managing these entrepreneurs rather than directly on the entrepreneur itself. If that makes sense.
Perfect. I 100% understand that now. David, I'd love to bring you in at this point again to discuss the similar point. One, your experience with Paygo in terms of the need to have clarity on access to the asset, whether that is informed by purely empirical, so it's what you have done since inception, or whether there's any evidence that suggests there's a different way to tackle this, and what that evidence may be.
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, Emile and Vincent have brought up very good points. Like, this is a productive asset. It's different than some of the other assets, and it's a larger, more expensive asset. And there's infrastructure, and so there's many models at play. We're testing many different financing models and doing our own, figuring out what makes sense. And I'd say that's for companies to innovate on now and figure out what is the best financing model for these. Do you lock the person's bike every day that they don't use it? Then isn't this the tool they need to make money? Probably. So maybe that makes sense. Maybe that doesn't. As Emile and Stima do, they don't lock the bike. They prevent you from swapping, and there's probably different models there. I think there's a lot of room for innovation, and so I'd say we're definitely running our tests, and I'm sure others will as well. But that's to figure out what is the best way to. At the end of the day, you're trying to create a financial product that really suits your customer the best. and reduces your fraud, but also helps those customers who have those bad days. And so maybe you're locking once a week, maybe you're not locking at all, maybe you're preventing them from using charging infrastructure. There's lots of different neat kind of areas to explore here, and I'd say that's an area for everyone to start innovating on and prove that they can finance. And so that's how we'll be competing with other financing companies. But working together to learn about this, because again, it's all very new, and our experience shows that every product is different, every market's different. Kenya is very different than Nigeria, and there'll probably be very different solutions in those markets.
Perfect, thank you, David. And now on to Emil, and maybe just as some sort of forward planning, Warren, shortly I'll bring you in just in case there's any questions streaming in from the audience thus far. I would like to also tackle those. But before that, Emil, maybe a two-part question. The first of those is similar to what we have already described. I know Paygo is touted sometimes even as the magic pill, that if you have Paygo, then accessibility is more or less guaranteed. In your experience, what are some of the levers or some of the areas that we can still innovate with the objective of making these products truly accessible to people? And I'm very familiar that even right at the edge of perfection, there's still be some room to improve. So in your experience, what levers still exist that we can really push? And I'm pushing or encouraging for you to be as specific as possible, of course, without sharing your own innovative part within the company.
Right. So when we think about accessibility in terms of motorbikes, also one thing that comes to my mind regarding motorbikes is all the question of providing also the maintenance and the spare parts for the riders to use their asset. Because we mentioned motorbikes are productive asset, but it's a very intensive usage. Boda riders, they tend to use around 100 kilometers a day on average their motorbikes, some a lot more. So it's not only a question of accessing the financing and the product itself, but it's also making sure that they can continue using it over time. And for this, so every company that wants to introduce motorbikes, fuel motorbikes or electric motorbikes in Kenya has really to think a lot about all the spare parts and maintenance. And it's not only a question of saying that the bike has to last at least the period of the loan duration. If we want riders to adopt electric motorbikes, we need them to be as robust as the current fuel motorbikes that they are using. And we see a lot of value in riders being able to have confidence in the fact that their bike can be used 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or even more. And this depends on our ability to also organize all the maintenance and the spare parts around this sector. And then also, I would like to mention also some good synergies that we see between electric motorbikes and the ability to reduce the risk in terms of default risk for the riders. And so there are several aspects, especially with the battery swapping model. But one first aspect that we already mentioned is the ability to collect data. It's very important to be able to collect data, to be able to understand better the usage, and also to understand the individual usage of each client, to be able to better estimate the risk. And in the end, if we identify that, if we know better the customers based on their usage data, we are able to reduce the risk and provide them with a lower interest rate. And another aspect that is very interesting in the swapping model is that we see the riders every day at our swapping stations when they come to swap, which is not the case in fuel motorbikes. When you sell a fuel motorbike, you may have a GPS to just know when the bike is, when you want to recover it, but you are not really tracking the bike. In our case, we know that the rider will come when he needs to swap, when he works. He comes several times at the station. So there is also a possibility to use this interface between the operator in the station and the rider to discuss with him about why recently he has not been working, is he able to pay his loan without difficulty? And we have here an opportunity to identify and to identify the risk of default before they really happen by discussing with the riders and by having this interface. And lastly, the very big advantage of electric motorbikes that we already mentioned is that it is cheaper to operate in terms of fuel and maintenance. So in the end, if a rider saves $2 a day additional a day, for example, it is an additional net income for him. So he will have more money to repay the loan of his bike, and he will have also more money at the end of the day as savings. So there are very interesting synergies between e-mobility, electric motorbikes, battery swapping, and financing that we believe in the end gives the opportunity to reduce the risk, the financing risk, which will translate into a lower interest rate for the riders. Because I don't know if you are aware, but today Boda Boda, when he takes a loan, so if he wants to go to a commercial bank, they will not give him any loan. If he goes to a microfinance company specialized in Boda Boda loans, the interest rate will be very high. It's typically what is done here in Kenya is at least 30% interest rate per year. So we have to leverage the synergies with the e-mobility also to reduce this cost of financing for the riders.
Thank you, Emil. Some very interesting thoughts there. Warren, do we have any questions from our participants?
I think there's lots of discussion and a lot of it is being answered by the panelists on chat, but I just picked out one that hasn't really been responded to is, can the same PayGo model be extended to three-wheelers, electric three-wheelers, and maybe how is this possible? Are there any limitations to why it's not being adopted at the moment, and maybe why are we not seeing as many use cases?
On our side, we definitely think it can apply to three-wheelers, it can apply to bicycles, it can apply to boats, it can apply to even four-wheelers. Like there's no reason why not. Two-wheelers in East Africa makes the most sense right now because the market's so big on petrol and it's easy to charge them. The charging infrastructure is not as expensive to do as for the cars. But that's the place to start. But we're seeing, we're testing with all sorts of different products. We're not just doing motorbikes, we're doing bicycles, we're doing three-wheelers, we're looking at boats. So I think all of those are great solutions and they all have their own, you have to figure out their own technology behind them. So I think there's a lot of room for all sorts of e-mobility. And who knows, even smaller, like we see scooters and little there's other mobility transports that could change the way that people move around in cities and in rural areas. So I think there's a lot of options available to try out all sorts of different vehicles, and entrepreneurs like Steam.
Yep. Okay. Another question because of the conversation. What happens in the pay-as-you-go models? Are users allowed to charge outside the charging stations, or all models only apply to dedicated charging or swap stations? And then number two is there any room for interoperability? Let's say if you have one provider of motorcycles or bicycles, and they might need to work with a few different financing partners. How can that interoperability work? And even between players, would such a PayGo system allow for different players, different brands to ride on the same pay-as-you-go infrastructure?
So yeah, maybe I can answer this first question. So in our model of battery swapping at Steam Boda, we don't allow any other charging except swapping in our stations, and there are several reasons to that. The first reason is a reason of safety. Lithium-ion batteries, if you decide to charge them using any type of cheap charger without without carefully checking at the compatibility between the charger and the battery, you risk of really damaging the battery or even starting a fire. So there is this question of safety. We prefer to provide the charge in a controlled environment where we are able to charge the batteries ourselves. And the other reason related to that is that by managing the charging of the batteries ourselves, we are able to guarantee some durability of the batteries. The durability of a lithium-ion battery is really dependent on how you charge, the speed of charge, the temperature during the charge. So there is also this benefit of charging the batteries in our stations with adequate thermal management and adequate charge management to provide this value of a long lifetime of the batteries. And the other aspect why we don't allow riders to charge elsewhere is a question of business model. When we onboard our riders, so we sign a contract with them. We explain them why we don't allow riders to charge elsewhere, and it's related to the fact that we include the repayment of the batteries in the price of the swaps. So they need to swap for us to recover the battery investment, and in the end, it directly benefit them because we are able to finance the batteries at a much lower interest rate than if they were financing it themselves through microcredit companies. I mentioned the Boda riders that will go and see a microcredit company, he will finance his asset at 30% or more interest rate. But us, as a company, as a manager of a fleet of batteries, we can access a lower cost of financing for the batteries. That's why we kind of lock in the system with swapping. And regarding the question of interoperability, I think definitely at some point there will be some discussions with a few players of questions of how we can make our systems interoperable. But the main challenge is that the battery is not a commodity. It's not something that you can plug in any motorbike very easily. It's kind of the core of the motorbike. It's the differentiating aspect when you talk to an OEM. The battery is it's a lot of research and development. It's a lot of work to have a good, long-lasting battery. So it's not easy to define the standard, but I believe over time there will be some discussions between a few large players to decide on going towards some standards.
Yeah, I love this debate. I think that the swap versus charge debate, very, very smart people argue both sides very convincingly to us. I know Emile and many companies here are trying the swap model, and like I said, Gogoro is very popular. But I think it's to be determined. I think there's good arguments for that swap model, all made very well from Emile. I think on the charge model, there's other really strong arguments. The fact that you can charge it at home, you can take your bike wherever you want it to go. You don't have to be dependent on your swap company's infrastructure. At the end of the day, you can, there's charge models on the go that can work that might be just as cost competitive as a swap model if you can get the electricity tariffs to be better. And ownership. Some customers want to own their batteries and have full control. And so Mkopa, we're happy that we're partnering with both, and we want to see that play out. And there's room for both. I think there might even be segments where swap is a much better market, other segments where charge is a better market. Interoperability is an interesting question. We're not seeing any of the companies want to do that right now. As Emile said, their business model is to own and control their own batteries and network. Maybe there's a little bit of room for collaboration. I think what is needed, though, is safety standards is very important, and making sure that people are abiding by safety standards. Fires are very, very dangerous in electric mobility. And although, I think the stat that Tesla came out is, I don't know if there's one on motorbikes, but with cars, there's 100 times more petrol car fires than electric car fires. But the electric car fires are the ones that catch the news. And an electric car fire is potentially a lot more dangerous because of the battery. And so we have to make sure that there are safety standards on those batteries. So if there is a charge at home model, which, a lot of China uses a charge at home model, it's working quite a lot in India right now. You want to make sure that you're really reducing that risk of people having their batteries let on fire at home, where there's big safety risks. So I think making sure that there's safety standards on the batteries is very important in testing, and we're very supportive of that. And then, making sure that people are setting up their charging infrastructure or swapping infrastructure in a safe manner that reduces that risk is very important, and we need to come together as an industry to do that, because when there is a battery fire, in Africa somewhere, the news is going to take hold of that, and it's really going to hurt all of us, right? It's going to say, oh, these are not safe, and we're all going to get hit by it. And so we have to all kind of band together to make sure that we are trying to reduce that risk as much as possible. Because and then when it does happen, we have to make sure we act responsibly and really, in the customer's best interests. So I think that's very important for all of us in the Africa mobility industry, is to think about how we can reduce that risk.
Perfect. Vincent, do you want to add
Yes.
anything? Or sorry, I wanted. Sorry, briefly, Warren. I wanted to throw slightly break rank and throw a question back to you, purely because you have some perspective from IAMD's side. I'd like you to invite you to make a brief comment on the safety issues, the standardization issues, and invite you to speak from the perspective of industry-wide knowledge, both as part of IAMDA and as part of the Kenya Bureau of Standards Technical Committee.
Well, thanks for that. I think even just from an industry perspective, there's still quite a big push on ensuring that we don't, encourage the use of substandard goods or products in the market, especially now that this is a pretty young industry. There are, opportunities for some players to introduce, let's say, second life batteries into the market, which might again water down the experience of the end users. I believe there could be suitable business models for applying, second life batteries in very short distance applications that might not hurt the user experience. But even on top of that, ensuring that there is proper safety and quality for these, especially the batteries, which are one of the critical components, as well as other drivetrain components. That can only be guaranteed through ensuring that there is proper certifications from the different countries of origin, whether you're sourcing from the Asian markets, from the European or American markets. And also strengthening local capacity. So the standards body locally needs to also put in place standards for when people are importing their electric two-wheelers, three-wheelers, or any other kind of vehicles. This is important just because sometimes when you have a gap in certifying your products from the country of origin, you need to have a standard at the local market to ensure that the products are properly certified and then imported the correct way. So I believe there's still room, let's say, even in the interoperability question and the chemistries of batteries, because each player would need to test out their different business models and applications for various types of vehicles. So the room is still quite big and it can accommodate so many players and different market products. But fundamentally, there needs to be strengthening of these quality standards to ensure that even the industry where the market doesn't really have standards yet, industry can also play an important role in self-regulating with appropriate standards to ensure that batteries of a certain quality, capacity, whenever they're being introduced for commercial purposes. And it also even leads me to the other question which had been asked about what are these operators of electric vehicles and even the pay-go managers doing around ensuring that the rider gets optimum experience. For instance, if it's an electric motorcycle and the batteries are degrading in the quality, at what point should operators be determining this is the cutoff where the performance is substandard and then the battery needs to be replaced? How are those mechanics going to work to ensure that at least the industry can maintain proper value for the end customer who is paying for this product?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Warren. And I notice we have 10 minutes, and I'm keen to tackle one last question from the panelist. And this question is, if we take what other OEMs, especially on four-wheelers, are doing, and here I can quote Ford with the F-150 Lightning and also Rivian with their truck, these OEMs are making it possible to access electricity, or rather two things. You can access mobility through the battery, but also you can access electricity and you can plug it in and power your home or things like this. And I also would like to anchor this in David's comment about how markets are different. Do you foresee a similar need with two-wheelers? And also within the accessibility question, do you foresee a similar need with two-wheelers, such that someone will need their battery not just to run his or her motorcycle, but maybe to power a home or any other use? And is that something that your companies are embracing, or you are designing against, such that the battery will purely be used to run the motorcycle and there's absolutely no or little capacity to use it for anything else? Maybe if I start with you, Emil.
I missed the end of the question. Can you repeat, please?
Sure. I'm trying to gauge the level of demand or the level of interest to use the battery to do other things rather than simply run the motorcycle.
Yes. No, I think it's a very promising topic, especially when we look at more rural areas. We see a good synergy between the potential between microgrids and electric two-wheelers in particular, because in some areas where we have microgrids, for example, there may be some villages that don't have any access to any electricity. So there is a good potential to explore to use electric two-wheelers or electric three-wheelers to potentially also deliver batteries to zones and villages that are not connected to any source of electricity. So there are lots of potential business models to think about, and we can also consider electric motorbikes as a potential new productive use of energy for microgrid developers, because microgrid developers, their main challenge is to make sure that they have enough consumption to be able to finance their microgrid. So they are looking at new usage of electricity that can consume the electricity produced by the microgrid, and electric motorbikes are a very good answer to this challenge. So I think in our case, we start with areas like Nairobi, where we don't see a very big need for using batteries in other types of usage, but we believe the more we go towards rural areas and areas that have difficulty in terms of grid reliability or grid access, it's a very interesting opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Emil. David, could I jump onto you? Are you seeing a level of market fragmentation where companies like Steamer Buddha and others may have to accommodate for the possibility of their batteries being used for other things rather than simply mobility on the motorcycle?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they'll have to, but I think there'll be a good opportunity to. There's a big question around e-waste and recyclability of batteries, and Copa in the past has really been able to utilize our larger systems, and we get returned those larger power systems and then turn them into lower cost, smaller systems that allow even lower income people to access our products. And there's going to be a big opportunity here with using electric mobility batteries for other use cases, mini grids, electric power, or other use cases. And a key to that is the data, right, which Emil talked about earlier. It's very important, is making sure we understand the data in those batteries. We can understand what those use cases are. But there's going to be a big opportunity to use that for many uses. Somebody used like a Rivian to do. Was it like the power went out and they did like a doctor procedure at a hospital or something like that? I don't remember what the procedure was, but there was one of these great stories. And I'm sure we'll see those, right? Like, Africans are extremely innovative and will find ways to use these batteries and the power in ways that we haven't thought about, because there's going to be so much more accessibility to these batteries. So there's definitely a giant market opportunity out there for reusing these batteries, and we're excited to learn about that as well, and understand how to play in that world.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And maybe lastly, Vincent, what are your thoughts on this particular topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any specific thought about it. I think that, yes, there are probably a lot of opportunities that can develop from there. It's not something that I've met so much in, with the companies that we have been financing so far. But why not? I mean, yeah, there's definitely some use cases and where that can be relevant. And as Emil mentioned, the further away from cities and big urban center we are going to go, the more likely this is going to become the case.
Awesome, thank you, Vincent. So I'd like to give a brief of what we've spent the last hour doing, and when we started, my objective, which was followed on by the wonderful panelists, was to be very clear on two things: what we meant by PAYGO and also what we meant by accessibility. I think where the discussion has ended is in making it clear that these are two multivariant equations, such that PAYGO has a number of implications, and also accessibility has a number of implications. It's access to the battery, for example, is it access to the motorcycle for the specific need of mobility. And I guess these are all questions that need real looking into and real study. I also love the reality that there's a lot of companies looking into various things, and there's great opportunities for companies and individuals to be very complementary in their working, such that generally or holistically a solution will be provided, but it is a solution that is based on companies' different and complementary understanding of various aspects within the field. I think it was very ambitious for us to try and unpack this within an hour. Certainly, we can't entirely exhaust the topic, but I have no doubt that there'll be plenty of opportunity through our own experience and also fora like these to unpack the subject a lot further. But with that, I can only thank the panelists for their participation and hand this back over to Warren. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alex, for that interesting session. And thank you all to Emil, David, and Vincent for at least coming through and sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it. We have our next session at 3 o'clock East Africa time. So that will just be in a couple of hours. Please feel free to join us as we'll be discussing electric vehicles and their intersection with renewable energy. So we'll be having an exciting panel for that as well, because there's lots of experiences around the continent. And please come and join us, ask the questions because we'll have the experts in the room, and let's engage more. So we thank you for your participation. We'll be closing out the room in exactly 3 minutes. So please feel free to still connect on the chat section. Ask any questions if you need to. I don't know if even from the panelists, whether you still had any other unanswered questions or comments that you wanted to pass around before we close the meeting.
I just want to say great job, IAMDA and Alex. Thanks a lot for hosting. These are the conversations we need as an industry, and so excited to keep having many more of them.
Right. So I was just wondering, maybe before we even wrap up, on PAYGO, what are the sort of dynamics between, let's say, different parts of the continent, between, let's say, the East Africa side, Southern Africa, West Africa? Are there any fundamental dynamics, or is the market pretty similar because the product is also quite similar?
From our experience, the markets are very different, and the products are probably going to have to be different. You have Nigeria has really unreliable grids, has fuel subsidies, and has a somewhat hostile government towards two-wheelers. So the model there is going to be very different and have to be very different. In Kenya, where you have a decently reliable grid, high fuel prices without now subsidies. Some of it's already away, and more of it will come, and so you'll have different products. And then Southern Africa, you have different adoption. You have in East Africa, you have a lot of these boda taxis, commercial boda taxis. I know French Africa, West Africa, it's more personal use. You have different infrastructure. Egypt and South Africa have very different, stronger infrastructure, and so scooters might be more viable there. So I think the products aren't going to be the same. I think Africa is so diverse, and each market's going to have its own entrepreneurs who figure out their markets and their charging or swapping solutions. And so I think there's a lot of room for that innovation, and it's you know, Africa's not one place.
Yeah, definitely agree with this point. I think each country in Africa is really specific, and one product may work very well in Kenya and then may not work on other markets. The constraints also in terms of purchase power can be different. In Kenya, we have motorbikes that are sold, for example, 1,300, 1,400 USD, and in some West African country, it's below 1,000 USD. Just to give you another example. So yeah, it's really needs to be a tailored solution. And as a company, Steam Aboda, we define ourselves mainly as a battery swapping technology company to provide the technology infrastructure to other companies that may operate in different markets in Africa.
Any thoughts from you, Vincent, before we wrap up?
No, nothing else on my side, except good job, guys. Thanks a lot, Alex and Warren, for making that happen, and probably we'll see you around in Nairobi.
All right. Well, great. Thank you all. And for those in Nairobi, remember we'll have an expo on the Saturday of 29th. So we look forward to seeing you there. Otherwise, have a great afternoon, and let's meet in a couple of hours.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.